Chapter 10. I tried to stay awake that night, but it was hopeless. I was dreaming straight away. I dreamed that the baby was in the blackbird's nest in Mina's garden. The blackbird fed her like flies and spiders, and she got stronger and stronger until she flew out of the tree and over the rooftops and onto the garage roof. Mina sat on the back wall drawing her. When I went closer, Mina whispered, "Stay away, you're danger." Then the baby was howling in the room next door, and I woke up. I lay listening to Mum, cooing and comforting her, and the baby squeaking and hissing. The birds were singing outside. When the feed was over and I was sure everyone was asleep, I crept out of bed, got my torch, pulled some clothes on, and tiptoed past their room. I took a jar of aspirin from the bathroom. I went downstairs, opened the back door, and tiptoed into the wilderness. The takeaway trays were down under the newspapers and a heap of weeds. They tilted over and lots of the sauce had run out. When I looked inside the char siu, it was all gluey and red and cold. I dropped the soggy spring rolls into the same tray and went down towards the garage. "You must be stupid," I told myself. "You must be going round the stupid bend." I looked up at the blackbird on the garage roof and saw how it opened its yellow beak so wide as it sang. I saw the sheens of gold and blue where the early light shone on its black back. I switched on the torch, took a deep breath and stepped inside. The scuttling and scattering started. Something skittered across my foot and I nearly dropped the food. I came to the tea chest and shone the torch behind. "You again?" he squeaked. "Thought you'd gone away." "I've bought something," I said. He opened his eyes and looked at me. "Aspirin," I said, "and number 27 and 53, spring rolls and pork char siu." He laughed, but he didn't smile. "Not as stupid as you look," he squeaked. I held the takeaway tray across the tea chest towards him. He took it in his hand, but he started to wobble, and I had to take it back again. "No strength," he squeaked. I squeezed between the tea chests. I squatted down beside him. I held the tray up and shone the torch onto the food. He dipped his finger in. He licked his finger and groaned. He stuck his finger in again and hooked a long, slimy string of bean sprouts and sauce. He stuck his tongue out and licked, and he slurped out pieces of pork and mushrooms. He shoved the spring rolls into his mouth. The red sauce trickled down from his lips, down over the chin and onto the black jacket. "Ah," he said. "Ooh." He sounded like he was loving it, or he was in pain, or both things together. I held the tray closer to his chin. He dipped and licked and groaned. His fingers were twisted and stunted. His knuckles were swollen. "Put the aspirin in," he said. I put 2 aspirin into the sauce and he picked them out and swallowed them. He belched and bounced. His hand slipped to his side again. His head slumped back against the wall. "Food of the gods," he whispered, 27 and 53. I put the tray down onto the floor beside him and shone the torch on him. There were hundreds of tiny creases and cracks all over his pale face. A few fine colourless hairs grew on his chin. The red sauce below his lips was like congealed blood. When he opened his eyes again, I saw the tiny red veins like a dark net across the whites of his eyes. There was a smell of dust, old clothes, dry sweat. "Had a good look," he whispered. "Where are you from?" "Nowhere." "That'll clear all this out. What will you do then?" "Well, what will we do? Nothing and nothing." He closed his eyes again. "Leave the aspirin," he said. I took the top off and put the jar on the floor. I had to push aside a little heap of hard, furry balls. I held one up to the torchlight and saw it was made of tiny bones glued together with fur and skin. "What are you looking at, eh?" he said. I put it on the floor again. "Nothing." The blackbird on the roof sang louder and louder. "There's a doctor comes to see my sister," I said. "I could bring him here to see you." "No doctors." "Nobody." "Who are you?" "Nobody." "What can I do?" "Nothing. My baby sister's very ill." "Babies." "Is there anything you can do for her?" babies, sprittle, muck, sprue, tears. I sighed. It was hopeless. My name's Michael. I'm going now. Is there anything else I can bring you? Number 27 and 53. He belched again. His breath stank. Not just the Chinese food, but the stench of the other dead things he ate. The blue bottles, the spiders. He made a gag noise in his throat and he leaned away from the wall like he was going to be sick. I put my hand beneath his shoulder to steady him. I felt something there, something held in by his jacket. He reached. I tried not to breathe, tried not to smell him. I reached across his back and felt something beneath his shoulder, his other shoulder as well, like thin arms folded up, springy and flexible. He reached, but he wasn't sick. He leaned back against the wall and I took my hand away. Who are you? I said. The blackbird sang and sang. I wouldn't tell anybody, I said. He lifted his hand and looked at it in the torchlight. I'm nearly nobody, he said. Most of me is Arthur. He laughed, but he didn't smile. Arthur? Arthur Itris, he squeaked. It's the one that's ruining me. Arthritis, oh, that's what he means. Ruining me bones. Turns you to stone, then crumbles you away. I touched his swollen knuckles. What's on your back? I said. A jacket. Then a bit of me. Then lots and lots of Arthur. I tried to slip my hand beneath his shoulder again. No good, he squeaked. Nothing there's no good. No more. I'm going, I said. I'll keep them from clearing the place out. I'll bring you more. I won't bring Dog to death. He licked the same dry sore from below his lips. 27 and 53, he said. 27 and 53. I left him, backed away towards the door, went out into the light. The blackbird flew away over the gardens, squawking. I tiptoed into the house. I stood for a minute at the baby's cot. I put my hand beneath the blankets and felt the rattling of her breath and how soft and warm she was. I felt how tender her bones were. Mum looked up at me and I could tell she was still asleep. Hello, she whispered. I tiptoed back to bed. When I slept, I dreamed that my bed was all twigs and leaves and feathers, just like a nest.
Chapter 11. Next morning, Dad said he could hardly move. He was all bent over. He said his back was killing him. He was stiff as a blinking board. Where's those aspirin? He yelled down the stairs. Mum laughed. All this exercise'll do him good, she said. It'll get that fat off him. He yelled again. I said, where's those bloomin' aspirin? I kissed the baby and ran to catch the bus to school. That morning we had science with Rasputin. He showed us a poster of our ancestors, of the endless shape changing that had led to us. There were monkeys and apes, the long line of ape-like creatures in between, then us. It showed how we began to stand straighter, how we lost most of our hair, how we began to use tools, how our heads changed shape to hold our big brains. Coot whispered it was all a load of rubbish. His dad had told him there was no way that monkeys could turn into men. Just had to look at them. Stands to reason. I asked Rasputin if we keep on changing shape, and he said, who knows, Michael? Maybe evolution will go on forever. Maybe we'll go on changing forever. Bollocks, whispered Coot. We drew the skeleton of an ape and the skeleton of a man. I remembered what Mina had said, and I looked really closely at the poster. I put my hand up and said, what are shoulder blades for, sir? Rasputin crinkled his face up. He reached behind his back and felt his shoulder blades and smiled. I know what Mother used to tell me, he said. But to be honest, I haven't really got a clue. Afterwards, Coot hunched his shoulders up, lowered his head, stuck out his chin. He lurched through the corridor, grunting and running at the girls. Lucy Carr started screaming. Stop it, you pig, she said. Coot just laughed. Pig, said Coot. I'm not a pig, I'm a gorilla. And he ran at her again. In the yard when I played football, I realised how tired I was with being awake so much during the night. Leaky kept asking what was the matter with me. I was playing crap. Mrs. Dando came again when I was standing by myself at the side of the field. What's up? She said. Nothing. And how's the little one? Fine. I looked at the ground. Sometimes I think she stops breathing, I said. Then I look at her and she's fine. She will be fine, she said. You'll see. Babies so often bring worry with them into the world. but you'll be wrestling with her before you know where you are." She touched me on the shoulder. For a moment, I wondered about telling her about the man in the garage. Then I saw Leaky looking, so I shrugged her off and I ran back yelling, "On me head, on me head." It was a dozy afternoon. Some easy maths, then Miss Clark's reading us another story, this time about Ulysses and his men trapped in the cave with the one-eyed monster Polyphemus. I was nearly asleep as she told us how they had escaped by pretending to be sheep. I took my skeleton picture home. I kept looking at it on the bus. There was an old bloke sitting behind me with a Jack Russell on his knee. He smelt of pea and pipe smoke. "What's that?" he said. "Picture of what we used to be like long ago," I said. "Can't say I remember that," he said, "and I'm pretty ancient." He started going on about how he'd seen a monkey in the circus in his young days. They trained it to make tea, but it was nothing like a person really. But maybe it had just been practicing. There was spit dribbling at the side of his mouth. I could see he wasn't all there. "There's a man in our garage," I said when he'd shut up. "Eh?" he asked. The Jack Russell yapped. He put his hand around its mouth. He seemed to be thinking hard. "Eh?" he said again. "Oh, and there was the loveliest lass on the trapeze. You could swear she could nearly fly." Chapter 12. Dr. Death was there when I got home. He was in the kitchen with Mum and Dad. He had the baby on his knee and he was fastening her vest up. He winked at me when I came in. Dad poked me in the ribs. I saw how flat Mum's face was. "It's this damned place," she said when Dr. Death had gone. "How can she thrive when it's all so dirty and all in such a mess?" She pointed out the window. "See what I mean?" she said. "Bloody stupid toilet, bloody ruins, a bloody stupid wilderness." She started crying. She said we should never have left Random Road. We should never have come to this stinking derelict place. She walked back and forward in the kitchen with the baby in her arms. "My little girl," she murmured, "my poor little girl." "The baby has to go back to hospital," Dad whispered. "Just for a while, so the doctors can keep an eye on her. That's all. She'll be fine." He stared out of the window into the wilderness. "I'll work harder," he said. "I'll get it all ready for when she comes back." "I'll help," I said, but he didn't seem to hear. We had bread and cheese and tea. The baby lay there in a little carry cot beside us. Mum went upstairs to put together the things the baby would need in hospital. I put the skeleton picture on the table and looked at it, but couldn't concentrate on it. "That's good," Dad said, but he wasn't looking at it properly either. I went up and sat on the landing. I watched Mum throwing vests and nappies and cardigans into a little case. She kept clicking her tongue and going, "Ugh, ugh," like she was mad at everything. She saw me there and tried to smile, but started to click her tongue again. When she finished, she said, "Don't worry, it won't be for long." She leaned down and put her hand on my head. "What are shoulder blades for?" I said. "Oh, Michael," she said. She shoved past me like I was really getting on her nerves. But when she was halfway down the stairs, she stopped and came back to me. She slipped her fingers under my shoulder blades. "They say that shoulder blades are where your wings were when you were an angel," she said. "They say they're where your wings will grow again one day." "It's just a story, though," I said. A fairy tale for little kids, isn't it?" "Who knows? But maybe one day we all had wings, and one day we'll all have wings again." "Do you think the baby had wings?" "Oh, I'm sure that one had wings. Just got to look at her. Sometimes I think she's never quite left heaven and never quite made it all the way here to earth." She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "Maybe that's why she had such trouble staying here," she said. I watched her. Wondered what she'd say if I told her now about the man in the garage. I didn't tell her. Before she went away, I held the baby for a while. I touched her skin and her tiny soft bones. I felt the place where her wings had been. Then we went in the car to the hospital. We went to the baby's ward and left Mum and the baby there. Dad and I drove back to Faulkner Road. We sat in the big empty house and looked at each other. Then he went back to painting the dining room walls. I drew the skeleton with wings rising from the shoulder blades. I looked out of the window and saw Mina sitting high up on the top of the back wall.
Hi everyone, I'm going to explain to you lesson 6 of Skellig, where you will have listened to chapters 10, 11 and 12, and now you need to know what the learning's going to be. So the learning intention for today is to write a character description. We're going to focus on Skellig, the creature in the garage. What I'd like you to do in a moment is to pause this clip and to write down as many things as you can remember about the creature as you can in 3 minutes. You might want to look at some of the previous learning you've done and gain some ideas from that. Think about what he says all the time, what he might eat, what is around him. Have a go. Pause the video now. Okay, now you've done that, we can now think about what we might need to have in our toolkit for when we're writing a character description. If we look at our toolkit here, it's quite a familiar toolkit that we would have used in class before. So we're looking for you to include noun phrases, parenthesis, and what I've included on this slide is some examples of what parenthesis is and how you can use brackets to add extra information, or dashes, or commas. And you might like to magpie the examples here to use in your character descriptions in a moment. You might also like to think about fronted adverbials and the inclusion of relative clauses. Now, if you're wondering what your piece of writing might look like, here is an example. And this is taken from Harry Potter, and it's a model text, and it explains and describes Harry Potter. And you might like to use this as an example just to give you an idea of the length, the quality, but also look at how the sentences begin. You've got the odd one that uses he, but there's lots of fronted adverbials due to his flexibility. Round glasses hung in front of his glossy blue eyes is a lot better than saying he had glasses on and blue eyes. So think about using some of these examples and creating your own character description of Skellig. Now you can write this up straight into Seesaw. You might like to put it in a Word document and attach it to Seesaw. Or you could use Purple Mash. Or you can use the old-fashioned way, write it out, take a photograph of it and upload it to Seesaw. Whichever way, we're looking forward to seeing your learning.